first, what do you think then is the number one threat to the United States?
The number one domestic issue is obviously the economy, inflation, gas prices, and borders. But the number one social problem facing America is what I call the epidemic of fatherlessness. It is particularly acute in the Black community, where 70% of Black kids, up from 25% back in 1965, enter the world without a father in the home married to the mother. And the stats are clear. If you're raised without a father, you're 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. What we've done with the so-called war on poverty that was launched in the mid-60s by a Democrat named Lyndon Johnson is to incentivize women to marry the government and incentivize men to abandon the financial and moral responsibility. And neither side is talking about this. The left doesn't talk about it because they created the problem. Our side doesn't talk about it for fear that if you're white, you'll be accused of engaging in systemic racism. And if you're called, as I was called by the LA Times, the black face of white supremacy. So the number one social issue facing America is not talked about by either Democrats or Republicans.
A new ABC Washington Post poll dove into the top issues facing voters and Americans in general. You touched on one of them, that being the economy. According to this poll, 74% of Americans say the economy is not so good or poor. That's a huge amount of the country. That's almost 3/4 of the country. So as a president elder, what would you do to inspire confidence in the economy again?
Stop the spending, stop paying people not to work, war on oil and gas, build a pipeline, reduce taxes, reduce regulations, do the kinds of things that Donald Trump did. They gave us arguably the best economy in American history.
And how would you differ from Donald Trump then? You're saying he gave us the best economy. Why should voters pick Larry Elder over Donald Trump?
Well, I'm not running against Donald Trump, I'm running against Biden Harris. But what I bring to the table is what I said earlier. Republicans are taking a pocket knife to a problem that requires a machete. And the machete is necessary to get government down to the size it ought to be. The founding fathers intended for the limited duties and obligations of the federal government to be paid for with duties and tariffs. Now we take almost 32% from the American people, federal, state, and local, whereas in 1900 we took about 9% federal, state, and local from the American people. We're taking way too much money from the American people, and as a result, our economy is not growing nearly as fast as it would otherwise would grow. You get the government down to the size it should be, leave as much money in the pockets of the American people as possible, and the economy will soar.
What does your machete here look like? What are you cutting that Republicans, you're saying right now, are too afraid to?
Well, the amendment that I would propose would fix spending to a certain percentage of the GDP. I would argue maybe 10%. Right now it's around 22%, which require a lot of deep cuts and a lot of major changes in some of the programs. For example, Bill Clinton once set up a commission to deal with the fact that Social Security right now is spending more than it's taking in. He recommended 3 things: either changing the eligibility age or requiring a greater number of people to a higher percentage of contributions, or to get a greater return by allowing people to invest part of their money excuse me, in instruments like the stock market. Yet nothing was done. So these are some of the kinds of things that the politicians would have to do if you force them to cut spending to a certain percentage of the GDP. Otherwise, they could not run for re-election. It's amazing how creative people can get when they have no option but to cut. And that's what the amendment to the Constitution would force them to do.